Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show Second Take. This is my Friday show where I kind of go on a little more on things, including shutting off my phone. I'm that guy. And wrapping up the week on the news items, things that have been going on. This is the second last one, actually. This was kind of a special broadcast that we had during the election period, and it's going to wrap up at the end of this month, unless some generous sponsor pops up to want to cover more of those episodes. Other than that, otherwise, you'll still get me on Wednesdays, of course, and other special times. So I got a good lineup today. Dave Bradley is going to come on. He knows all things Bitcoin in and out. I think his account online is Bitcoin Brains, and he's going to talk about independence in Bitcoin. It'll be a good discussion. I mean, when we talk about currencies, ideas, things like that, and digital currencies might offer a way to look at increasing independence. After that, I'm going to talk to Dr. Michael Bonner of the Aristotle Foundation. They put out a great piece just on immigration, the system in Canada, and something, not just pointing out the problems with it, but pointing out some solutions, which is always refreshing, and it's a really good paper. So that'll be a good discussion. I mean, whether or not our government ever actually gets around to fixing anything, I don't know, but we got to point out the possible solutions. So this show is live. Use that comment scroll. I like seeing those discussions there. See Russell Matthews checking in from the Saskatchewan, the 52nd state, apparently. Okay. And JR Michael. And yeah, Saskatchewan, doesn't get mentioned enough, particularly with the independence movement. It's quite strong out there, too. I'm going to be going out there on June 2nd in Regina to a function and speaking at that one. I'm looking forward to meeting the folks out there and bending their ear on the independence movement. And E-Sharp checking in. Good to see you. All right. So, yes, I'm just, a bit of the title. I don't do a normal monologue on Fridays like I do on Wednesdays. But still, it's as I entitled this one, Canada is still broken. It's funny that the Liberals got so up in arms. They successfully campaigned on pushing on us and, getting upset with Poilievre saying Canada's broken for a year and a half, which was effective for a long time. Unfortunately, due to the Trump factor down south and a sudden surge of domestic patriotism, they turned that around. I mean, it's an interesting political lesson, a lesson in communications and branding. Something that's successful at one time isn't at a different time, depending on the external events going on. And basically, Poilievre got his nose rubbed in it. Oh, how dare you say Canada's broken? We all love Canada. Canada's fine. Canada's beautiful. Canada needs to be strong and unbroken in order to counter the dastardly Trump. We have to have our elbows up. But the elbows dropped down pretty fast once Carney was elected. And now we're left with Canada still being broken. That's the thing. What's changed? What's changed under Carney besides the person at the head of the Liberals? It's mostly the same people in cabinet. They're saying the same things. We got the same energy policies, same tanker bans, same pipeline bans. That's not going to change. Housing is still unaffordable. People are having trouble paying for the housing they've already got. The spending is still going through the roof. Our GDP per capita hasn't changed any. We need radical policy changes if we're going to unbreak Canada. None of them are coming. Justice? Well, we just saw a guy who molested 33 kids get sentenced to a record-breaking 17 years. You got to keep in mind, in Canada, with 2/3 mandatory release and some of those other beautiful things that the Liberals won't fix, that child rapist will probably be out in 10 to do it again. I'm not a forensic psychiatrist, but I bet you when a person's inclined to abuse that many children, they're not going to come out any better than they went in. But welcome to Canada. Canada the broken. Foreign affairs, oh yes. Hamas put out a statement thanking Canada again. Yes, the terrorist organization, the raping, murdering scumbags of Hamas have thanked Canada. And Anita Anand, our global affairs minister, who doesn't seem to be much brighter than Melanie Joly, who she replaced. So, whatever, Canada is still broken. At least it's very cracked up. Let's widen those fissures. We can't save it all, but we can save the West. All right, well, let's check in with a news update from Jen Hodgson. How's it going?
Hey, Cory. Doing good, thanks.
Right on. So, lots else is going on. I know, aside from my morose Canada's broken rampage, what was going on out there in the Western Standard newsroom?
Well, it's definitely hard to top those two stories that you just mentioned, but I'll do what I can. So the energy minister, his name is Tim Hodgson, no relation as far as I know, though he does look a lot like my Uncle Paul, I will say.
Well, you never know.
You never know.
Time for a little family digging, you get some surprises sometimes in the tree.
You do. And, in this case, it wouldn't be the worst Liberal minister minister to be aligned with. We actually have some positive news from Carney's energy minister here in Calgary today. He's advocating for pipelines. Of course, we'll have to wait and see if there's any action to the words that he said, but that includes promising 2 years or less in terms of processing time. And he also says that it's not a matter of if the pipelines will be built, but a matter of when.
Well, that's positive language. I mean, I'll give credit where it's due. I don't believe these guys.
Yeah.
But I will celebrate when they're saying the right words, but we just need to see action. I'm not believing anything until I see iron going in the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we generally feel like that in the newsroom. And another piece of news out of Carney's cabinet is that they're looking to tariff food. So food products coming into Canada could face tariffs. And as we discussed in our morning meeting today, about 80% of our food that Canadians consume actually does come from imports. So that could be quite a serious cost tacked on to the already high price of groceries.
Rather massive cost. I mean, there's some realities, the things that came about whenever I was doing the elbows up, shop Canadian. Okay, where am I going to get my avocados, my coffee? Yeah. I mean, we're a winter nation. We're lucky we got the plains. We produce a large amount of cereal crops and grain and cattle and supply managed dairy, but there's a whole lot of stuff we can't get in wintertime.
Right. and those items that you mentioned, we tack a huge tariff on them for when we're exporting those products, like 250, 300% tariffs on the dairy and poultry. So, we see a lot of back and forth, and now these tariffs look like they're going to be on food that we bring in too.
Oh, well, maybe we can just get used to that Russian diet. I remember touring the Soviet Union back in the 80s and as a spoiled kid being over there, I lost weight because most of your meal was a heavy black bread, a greasy butter, and a few basic vegetables. And again, I was a spoiled North American kid, but you bulked up on what the local foods were in the Soviet Union back then. Yeah, nobody starved to death, but boy, you didn't really look forward to your meals for the day. But protectionism really works. Good work, guys.
Yeah, well, we sure can take things for granted, and we just have everything available to us on the grocery shelves. But now it looks like they might not be as available because they'll be quite a bit out of our regular price range.
And people ever wonder where their Caesar salad comes from in January in Canada?
Yeah.
They're growing it in Arizona, guys. But all right, well, whatever. We'll tax ourselves rich one day.
Yeah, I guess that's a good optimistic outlook, Cory.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Hamas. So speaking of Hamas supporters and anti-Israel agitators, a whole plane load has flown in from Amsterdam. And your viewers might remember last November in Holland, there was a huge clash between Israeli soccer fans and pro-Palestine protesters. And I think it was about five Israelis were injured.
Yeah, they
10,
chased them right
20.
to their hotels. It was a good old-fashioned lynch mob.
It seriously was. So now Toronto on Sunday will be experiencing something along those lines. Those same agitators have already arrived. Toronto police have responded saying that we're going to keep it safe and this event will go on. It's a Walk for Israel event, an annual event. And the agitators are calling it a walk against Israel. So
the Toronto police will bring them coffee and donuts, and they will jail the Israeli people who scheduled and peacefully want to do an event because Mayor Chow hates Jews. I'm going to go blunt with that because I'm getting sick and tired of it. They've been targeting Jewish businesses, they've been targeting Jewish neighborhoods, and then we're finding out the Toronto police were actually instructed to be soft on those who are defending against the genocide by Israel. This country is an international embarrassment. It's no wonder that a bunch from Amsterdam feel this is a good place to get out there and chase some Jews around because other countries actually crack down on that a bit.
Well, yes. And as Nigel mentioned to me after the news meeting this morning, that Canada does have a history of preventing people that are coming in for disruptions, for agitation, even if it's something that they've said that they don't like. He gave an example from the 90s, but also Sammy Robinson. Sorry, am I getting that right?
Tommy Robinson, probably.
Excuse me, Tommy Robinson. Just last year,
they arrested him in Calgary.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So they do have the mechanisms, the authorities, the border authorities, the local police, to prevent people from coming in that they deem to be coming in to cause an upset. However, we don't see any of that in this case, just the Toronto police saying we're going to be there, have a strong police presence, and essentially just hope for the best because we have a designated spot for the anti-Israel demonstrators.
Yes, because they follow the rules and they're well controlled folks typically, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh man, what a weird world we're in.
Yeah, that's right. So in other news, we have the Golden Dome that Trump has proposed over the U.S., similar to what Israel has with their Iron Dome, and Carney wants in on it. So we see the whole election cycle elbows up, as you just mentioned in your opening statements, and now Carney's starting to think, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea. We could get in on that too.
Yeah, well, part of what I think is going on with that, I mean, one of the things Carney may change, he said part of his excuse for not having a budget this spring was that we want to wait until after the NATO summit. And Canada's always been embarrassing, at 1.3% of our GDP on the military, which is falling apart and old, and 75% of them are overweight. That was the latest stat from them. And this is a quick fix. This is somewhere where he can hit the 2% with doing nothing but signing a check, essentially, right? You don't have to reform the military. You don't have to buy new jets. You just say, yes, President Trump, we will partner up, and here's our investment plan. And then they can tell NATO, look at that, Canada's finally pulling its weight.
It seems
just hope
like
that it's not crazy.
Right. Yeah, well, very well could be, but it's like maximum amount of impact, but least amount of effort on Canada's part. Throw your covering over me.
Yeah. And let's hope that it's, this is, you're a little too young to remember, but Reagan and the Star Wars thing, this isn't a new concept. There was talks about the satellites having nukes and things like that back in the 80s. And that was sort of James Bondish sort of stuff they were talking about. And, but now the technology's at a point where maybe these things are conceivable.
It seems like it very well could be.
Or it could be a scam that's going to cost trillions of dollars for the Americans and the Canadians. Who knows?
And interesting how Trump wants to emphasize that it's a golden dome. In Israel, they have an iron dome. But this one's gold.
Much better. Well, and the thing Israel's is an incredibly effective defensive mechanism because they are getting constant attacks from all sides. But you got to remember that Israel is microscopic when compared to trying to cover all of North America. It's going to be interesting to watch, but it's interesting watching Carney sounding enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, right. And just one last note on Israel. Let's just remind your viewers that Dave Naylor, our news editor, is in Israel this week. So he's regularly putting up videos and stories about what he's encountered there so far. And I think when he gets back, he's planning on doing some more in-depth work too. Yeah,
I'm sure Dave will have a lot to say about it. I think I saw the update from Facebook. He's flying back today. So it's been, 7 or 8 days?
Yeah, I think it's been 7 days that he's been there. So, we'll look forward to having him back and hearing the stories.
Yeah, he'll have lots to share. I'll have to get him an extended portion on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Extended news update.
Right on. Well, thank you very much. I'll let you get back in the newsroom. You still got to keep up till Dave gets back.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm elbows deep, so better run back to it.
Well, elbows got to go somewhere up deep, wherever they might go.
Thanks for having me on, Cory.
Right on. Thanks. So that is our reporter, as you see, very prolific, busy, and coming up with those stories. Jen Hodgson, no relation, at least at this point, to that other Hodgson we were talking about. But that still has to be investigated. I think there might be something to it. You just never know anymore, do you? So, yeah, lots going on out there. And this one I like to remind everybody, we do not take tax dollars. We rely on you guys, advertisers, sponsors, and members. $10 a month for a subscription, $100 for a year. Well worth it. Get past the paywall. Helps cover people like Jen, people like me, my producer, John, who's doing a fantastic job there, and our reporters and columnists all across the country. So check it out, westernstandard.news/subscription. Take one out, guys. Nag your neighbors to take one out. I like pointing this one out. You can buy it and send it to your liberal uncle just to drive him nuts. Maybe you'll help convert him a little bit. Either way, this is how we beat the legacy media, guys. This is what modern media is about. It keeps us accountable to you. So if you've already subscribed, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And if you haven't yet, come on, get on board, guys. It's time. All right, let's turn to my first guest. He's been on before. It's been a little while, though, and he, again, loves to speak all things Bitcoin. I remember at a conference a little while back, he did that Q&A on how, I think it was something like Bitcoin fixes everything or something like that. And he does have an answer for everything. And most of them are pretty good. Most of them anyways. But he's going to talk about Bitcoin and independence. And it should be, and it will be, an interesting conversation. It looks like you're out in the woods there, Dave.
Yeah, I'm just out in Bragg Creek here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Having a cigar, is it?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Did you buy that cigar with Bitcoin?
I actually bought this cigar in the United States where the taxes on cigars are much lower.
Yes. I mean, it's cheaper to get pot nowadays, but
yeah,
and easier. So, I mean, it was interesting what you talked about, though. Independence is a lot of the talk. We're talking about changing perhaps the contract, the definition. A lot of discussion on what that might look like and how things could work. And do you feel things like a Bitcoin could play a big role in that?
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, what we're looking for and the problem that Bitcoin is solving are really the same thing, right? It's the fact that the federal government has grown too large, they take too much of our money, and they misspend that money quite drastically. And, Alberta independence is one step towards removing one of the many layers of government that currently do that to us right now. And Bitcoin, at the end of the day, is kind of like the antidote to all sort of government overreach at the end of the day. So that's in the broad sense where I think Bitcoin could fit in, but I think it could be useful in a whole bunch of ways to an independent Alberta.
Yeah, well, something was pointed out not too long ago. I think it might have been at that conference I was at. I saw you at that a few weeks ago. Of all the people who had their accounts seized, for example, or frozen and things like that during the truckers convoy, well, nobody's Bitcoin got touched. It's one thing that I'm sure the government would have loved to reach in and grab it, but they just don't have a way to do it. This is a way to keep some of your assets just out of their reach, no matter what they might think.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really direct way for an individual to keep some of their assets out of reach of the government. But the other thing that I don't think has really been considered yet is we don't know where this whole train is going. We don't know whether we get a separation vote, whether we have a negotiation between the federal and provincial governments, and we don't know how that might go. And the idea that the federal government may at some point attempt to seize funds from the provincial government is another one that I think could be in play at some point. And having a reserve of Bitcoin, that's something that a lot of jurisdictions in the world, about half the states in the United States, are looking at right now, and a whole bunch of countries are looking at. And I think now would be the time for Alberta to get on that, because it would give us a form of money that we can save in that the feds can't steal from us.
So other countries are looking at it. Have any other countries been doing this? I guess some of this we can't even tell if they have or not. But it's an interesting hedge. We've kind of moved away from backing our currencies with precious metals, but some are still doing that. But is Bitcoin sort of the new hedge?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is it should in theory be a hedge to sort of global financial instability, in the same way that gold has been at certain times in history. But lately it's mostly traded with like global liquidity. It's gone up when the market has gone up and down when the market has gone down. But we are starting to see a transition towards being sort of like a reserve asset. So we're seeing a bunch more companies, large publicly traded companies, holding massive amounts of Bitcoin as a savings tool and as a reserve. And like I mentioned, we're starting to see that in a lot of countries, a lot of states. So President Trump announced the strategic Bitcoin reserve a couple months ago. There wasn't much to that. They basically just announced they're going to keep the Bitcoin that they already have, whereas previous administrations have sold whatever Bitcoin they ended up seizing or coming into in some other way. But a number of states have bills in the works right now to create strategic Bitcoin reserves, and there are some countries that are already holding Bitcoin. We wouldn't necessarily know, to your point. Some companies and some countries may be holding Bitcoin already and may not have even told us about it, right? So there's a half dozen countries in the world that are already holding Bitcoin, and I think we're moving into that next stage for Bitcoin, where it's going to be looked at like a reserve asset, like gold. And I think with a lot of the sort of currency upheaval we're going to see in the world, with all of this sort of economic warfare going on, that more countries are going to start looking to back their currencies with something firm and something sound that cannot just be printed out of thin air.
And aside from just backing currencies with it, I guess, that's a bit of a guessing game, or can be considered by some. But as an investment tool for those who got in on Bitcoin in this last few years, have been doing quite well for themselves out of it. There could be a good return coming out of that as well. Rather than just securing and diversifying your asset pool.
Yeah, and you could look at it as an investment. I look at it more like a savings tool. And you could say the Bitcoin that I have now is worth a lot more dollars than it used to be. But is the Bitcoin getting more valuable, or are the dollars getting less valuable? Because the Bitcoin is the same, right? There's the same number of Bitcoins roughly that there were like 5 years ago. but the price of Bitcoin measured in dollars is much higher. And part of the reason for that is because there are many, many more dollars than there were 5 years ago. Most of the dollars in existence were printed since COVID. And so we're in this interesting spot in Alberta where, we've got the oil and gas industry here. We pull literally the most useful thing in the whole world out of the ground at a tremendously low price when you think about it. And then we turn around and we sell that for these fake paper pieces of nothing that the government creates out of thin air for free. And so I think dealing with an economy like we have here in Alberta that's grounded in real things, it's grounded in resources, deserves to be paired with a form of money that is just as real as those resources.
So a question people often have with digital currencies, or pretty much digital anything, like it's hard to understand, wrap our minds around it, though, is the security of it, right? Like, what is to keep, if a government has a reserve of gold, okay, you're going to build a giant vault, put up a bunch of security, hopefully keep that physical asset safe. What keeps a large government, say multi-billion-dollar Bitcoin account secure from somebody hacking and stealing it?
There are best practices, just like there are with the physical security of gold. So if you wanted to break into Fort Knox, you'd have to drill through a bunch of walls and dig under some fences and all kinds of physical, security barriers that you'd have to pass. And there are very similar best practices for Bitcoin. There's the sort of digital equivalent of these kinds of things. And we're actually set up quite well in Alberta, partly because of the way that our trust laws work here. We've actually had multiple companies from around Canada move to Calgary, specifically to set up Alberta regulated trust companies for the purposes of custodying Bitcoin. So we're one of the only places in the world, along with New York, that actually has laws that support the creation of trust companies that can hold Bitcoin on behalf of others. And so we actually have 3 companies here in Alberta that are already set up with all of this security, all the digital security, all the physical security that you need to go with it. And because they're local, they're regulated provincially. So again, they're outside of the reach of the arm of the federal government. If we as a province were to purchase a load of Bitcoin, we could store it at one or all 3 of those custodians and be quite confident in the safety, I would say.
Okay, so you kind of covered that security, and I saw still another, kind of on the micro level question with a person's personal Bitcoin assets from Jim Morgan, no relation. Not only, what keeps it secure from hacker, what prevents the governments from locking your coin wallet down so you can't access it? It kind of gets back to what I talked about before with the truckers convoy and seizing bank accounts. What keeps your assets away from the government?
Yeah, I mean, it's when it comes right down to it, it's the fact that no one's in charge. There's no body in charge of Bitcoin. There's no CEO. There's no board of directors. There's nobody to go to say, hey, you have to shut this account down. It's a completely decentralized system that wherein no one can ever shut anyone else's account down. Now, the thing that the government can still do is they can still show up at your house with guns and say, give us your Bitcoin, right? So it doesn't avoid that, but it's a lot easier to hide or obfuscate the fact that you have Bitcoin when dealing with a tyrannical government like that than it would be, a huge bar of gold or a pile of cash or other valuable ways that people have used to store money and hide it away from tyrannical governments in the past.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily know you have it. There was that presentation we saw as well from a woman who was basically a refugee from a hostile state, and she'd lost everything, basically just running, even without identification to get away from it. But she had a Bitcoin account. She had her savings. I mean, all you have to do is memorize, well, it's not that necessarily that easy, but a string of a bunch of words. If you set up that account, nobody interrogating you or holding you up or anything even knows you have an account or how to get to it or what's in it, as long as you don't give them that. And then you can reestablish somewhere else, access some sort of digital communication and get back into your account. I mean, in a sense, the wallet's in your head.
Yeah, absolutely. You just remember this 12-word seed phrase, and you can literally walk across any border with the ability to access that money just stored in your head. You don't need any kind of device. You don't need any high-tech security or anything. You just remember those 12 words, and there's nothing that they can really do about that because there's no way for them to really even prove do you have those 12 words, right? And so that example that you were talking about at the Cornerstone Forum that we were both at there was a really poignant one where I can't remember what country it was, but this refugee was fleeing persecution and was able to escape with all of their wealth because it was in Bitcoin. And this is a story that we've seen time and time again around the world where displaced peoples have been fleeing an area, and a lot of the time they end up fleeing with all their valuables, gold, jewelry, whatever you can carry. And in a lot of cases, they become targets for pirates and robbers and people who know they must be moving with their wealth. And by the time they get to their destination, they have none. And, these are extreme examples, but we in Canada and, in Alberta, we've been actually perilously close to that point. When you think about when you pair the trucker convoy and the fact that they were seizing bank accounts and freezing bank accounts of single moms who donated to the truckers with some of this, I would say, grossly illegal political persecution that we've seen with the likes of Tamara Lich and Chris Barber and the Coots group there, we're not living in a much freer country than these tyrannical dictatorial regimes that we're talking about people fleeing.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the aspects I can kind of see good is, for a libertarian who has no interest in giving any money to any government, I go down to the States. I've got an LLC set up down there, actually, and I vend some gemstones down in Arizona every winter. Though I have to declare all that cash is coming back and forth across the border, or the digital payments, from Visa, MasterCard, or whatever I'm taking down there. If I were to do transactions on the other side of the border in Bitcoin, though, the government wouldn't know about that, and I could do a lot of trade through that. I guess that's kind of got a good and a bad to it. People, I guess, with unsavory enterprises could potentially use digital currencies. I mean, I'm just pointing out some of the questions people have about it. Money laundering is an issue with Bitcoin. You don't even need to launder it. Could this I guess, empower some of the organized crime groups?
Yeah, I mean, every organized crime group uses cars. You know what I mean? Cars are a tool to move you around. Bitcoin is a tool for money. So tools like that, I think, are agnostic to their use case. Bitcoin doesn't care who you are. There's no value judgment built into Bitcoin. And part of the reason for that is because there is no central body. There's nobody deciding, hey, this is an acceptable use of Bitcoin. This is not an acceptable use of Bitcoin. And I think we should look at it the same way as that we look at guns or any other tool that we have in our lives that has a specific use case. There are definitely bad people who use cars for bad things. That doesn't mean that we should be looking at the general morality of the existence of cars, right? So I think Bitcoin is no different, and the reality is that the choice with Bitcoin comes down to the individual, and that's kind of the important part.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's Penn Jillette, and I'll slaughter the quote, but he said something great along the lines. Whenever somebody does something really bad, the government steps in to take rights away from good people. And, blaming the Bitcoin for its maluse with organized crime is still overlooking the problem. You've got organized criminals. You're just looking at one of the tools they're using, and taking away that means of digital currency from law-abiding citizens doesn't do the world any favors. But we got to make sure, at least to educate people, to avoid having a government step in and try to use that excuse. Or there's nothing the government hates more than losing control, and Bitcoin takes that control away from them.
Yeah, I don't think the governments of the world have really understood and internalized how much control Bitcoin will take away from them in the long term. Because, what we're talking about is kind of the censorship resistant element of Bitcoin, the fact that they can't freeze it or censor it. We can spend money anywhere in the world without their help or permission, which I think is really powerful. But the flip side of that is they actually have a huge amount of control over our entire society that they get from their ability to print money. And so they're printing money out in Ottawa. That's being spent. Not only is it not being spent in Alberta, proportionally compared to the rest of the country, but when it is spent here, a lot of the time they're actually spending it against us. You know what I mean? It's not like they're spending that money to give us safer streets and better roads and more health transfer payments and a better health system. They're spending that money in a lot of cases to crack down on dissent and these things like these political persecutions that I mentioned. And in the long term, what Bitcoin removes is the government's ability to print money to spend money, because now we have a competitive form of money that they can't print. And what we've seen everywhere in the world is when a better form of money or a harder form of money emerges, it pushes out the weaker forms of money. And that's why gold has been, the most successful form of money for most of human history, was because it was very hard to produce compared to most of the things that people had used as money in the past. And the market just sort of decides on the best choice. And I think we're in the midst of the market deciding on the fact that the Bitcoin is the best choice for money. And once it gets there, these central bankers, the tyrannical politicians out in Ottawa, will no longer be able to afford to pay to have horses trample old ladies, because they won't be able to print the money to afford that.
Yeah, well, I hope you maybe or some others also, pitch this to Premier Smith. I think if we ever saw any leader might be inclined to, she loves putting shots across the Ottawa bow too. And I mean, just taking a portion of Albertan funds, maybe a chunk rather than what would go into the Heritage Fund, take a portion of that and put it into Bitcoin. It's just also that way to remind Ottawa, yeah, this is Alberta's funds, and you can't even, you can't reach this no matter what you might want to do. Maybe she's receptive to it.
Yeah, and I know there's some movement in that direction, and I know she's a Bitcoiner. I was on her show many years ago when she had the talk radio show a couple times talking about Bitcoin, and she was a Bitcoiner way back then, and I know she knows the fundamentals behind Bitcoin, and like you say, the shot across the bow would be appealing. It's a way that we can assert a level of independence that we're not currently doing right now, and it may actually end up being useful, because I don't know enough about the structure of things like the Heritage Fund. I'm guessing that a lot of the assets in the Heritage Fund are controlled by banks and brokerages that ultimately would respond to a seizure order from the government of Canada if they decided they needed to spend our Heritage Fund. Whereas, any percentage of a fund like that we had in Bitcoin for our long-term savings is something that they simply could not take away from us.
It's a very, very interesting concept. I like it. We'll have to follow up more on this and push, as we've certainly got the atmosphere for everybody quite, I think, in Alberta, supportive of encouraging degrees of independence, whether full or even in part, and that's certainly an element of it. Before I let you go, I mean, just kind of getting back to the individual thing, though, because you've been great on promoting that. And I mean, it's still foreign to a lot of people. It's an unusual thing to wrap your head around. If somebody's interested in getting involved in Bitcoin just on their personal level in a small amount or a large amount, I mean, where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, where I would probably recommend is anybody who's curious to come out to our conference that we're putting on at the end of June here. We've got a conference called the Bitcoin Rodeo that we put on every year. That's happening on June 28th and 29th in downtown Calgary. And, we're going to have a lot of discussion, or obviously a lot of discussion on Bitcoin, but we're going to be leaning a lot towards these topics of Alberta independence and where does Bitcoin and different elements of Bitcoin fit in to a potentially independent Alberta, and also how does Bitcoin empower the individual to really take back a measure of their freedom. And that's really what Bitcoin is it's freedom money. It's money for those who value individualism and do not want the government making their decisions for them.
Well, great. Thanks again, Dave, for coming on the show. I mean, it's an intriguing concept, and I hope there's some moving forward on it. So appreciate you coming on, and maybe we'll have you on again soon, and we'll be talking about how much the government has decided to put into it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again. So yes, guys, that is Dave Bradley. You can find him online. He's prolific on X and all over as well. Just look him up. Bitcoin Brains, I think he likes to go by as well, and things such as that. And the Rodeo is a good event coming up in Calgary, and there's a lot of resources out there for Bitcoin. I'm not an expert in it. I'm familiar with it, but I mean, some of the concepts you got to think of is just having a finite amount of a resource. That's where gold has kind of worked fairly well over the years. Gold is still being mined, but the bulk of the easy gold is already there, and we're adding a little bit, but you're not adding a lot around the world as it's mined, and more gets added to the base. So it can provide a value that can't be flooded, and I guess unless there's an unusual discovery of a whole bunch of gold and resources, which is something interesting too, because Bitcoin gets mined, but it's a limited amount and it's smaller and smaller, so that nobody can suddenly open up the floodgates and flood the market with Bitcoin. It's even more secure than gold in that sense. Because I mean, maybe somebody will crack a mountaintop and find 1 million tons of gold and change the gold market. I doubt it. But Bitcoin, government can't print Bitcoin. That's the thing. I mean, that's part of where your buying power, your purchasing power has been going down the tubes for years. People don't understand this. They're not thinking about it. But when the government prints money, When you're talking about true currency devaluation, it's because, like anything, it's supply and demand. When you start flooding that market with these things, the value of it goes down. There's nothing worse to go down in value than your currency, is there? Because everything else you get is linked to that. So, I mean, I'm not gonna, we were chuckling about that the other day on one of the podcasts I was on, so, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not going to give financial advice, give that disclaimer. And it's true. I'm not great with it. I'm lucky. I got a bookkeeper for a wife. She takes care of just about everything for me, and does it well. But we do have a Bitcoin account, a small one, but it's been doing very, very well. I mean, I think most advisors will at least tell you, you want to diversify a bit of your asset pool, whatever it might be. And it just saves you against some of the fluctuations going on in different investments or currencies or things like that. The other thing, a question people ask, is there a lot of digital currencies out there? And it seems to be, I think, I could be wrong, but all those new ones popping onto the market, they kind of tamped down. Bitcoin was the first out of the gate, and it remains the dominant one and the stable one. So, I mean, if you're looking into that field, I suspect Bitcoin's your best bet. This is where you got some credibility and safety. And again, of course, the biggest appeal is just that that the damn government can't get at it. It's not enough people really realize what precedent was set when the government stepped in and seized the bank accounts of Canadian citizens. Like, they stole people's property. There's no other way to put that. And I don't care that you declared a state of emergency. It was protesters. It was protesters in Ottawa. I agreed. I felt that the protesters had overstayed their welcome. I felt it was time to start moving the guys out of there. They'd made their point. But to invoke a state of emergency and actually reach in and steal the assets of people's bank accounts, that's what got most of the condemnation around the world and from other countries, because the people, understanding authoritarian regimes, even in other countries, and that would, other political leaders understood, whoa, this is a big line you're crossing. They didn't even get upset so much with the horse trampling somebody or stepping in with police with batons, pushing protesters away. That happens in countries all the time. But to go in and seize the assets of somebody's bank account, that is a terrifying precedent to set. I mean, everything's an emergency now. I don't like some of that language, and that's what we're seeing with authoritarians. We're seeing with governments. They're declaring everything an emergency. The climate's an emergency. Firearms are an emergency. Fentanyl's an emergency. But you see, as soon as they put that emergency word in there, then they start laying the groundwork to try and justify extraordinary means to tamp down on that emergency, whatever it might be. And that's where we got to get worried. I mean, what better way to control somebody, though, than to control their funds? You economically castrate somebody, you have them under your thumb. It's almost as effective as outright incarcerating them. So what's going to be next? You didn't upgrade your home enough and you're contributing to climate change, and that's an emergency. Thus, we're going to take your money directly for something like that. I don't know where it stops. Let's see with us. Cyril Arnold saying you self-custody your Bitcoin on a device, so if the internet goes down, you still have it. Yeah, you can get it on a key, and then there's still passwords. There's ways and ways. And the other part is, even if you don't have any other aspect of it, Gail saying, what happens if the internet's shut down? Well, it might be temporarily at some point. Who knows? But it won't be for long. I mean, the world runs on the internet now. If the internet shuts down, you're up the creek anyway. Because every business, every bank is reliant now on digital data. So you won't be able to buy anything with your Visa or take out cash anymore either. So that's a bigger issue altogether. But in the short term, as we were talking about with that refugee who came over, she knew that 12-word password to get into her Bitcoin account. So no matter what, no matter where she went, as long as she knew those, and then you can get online somewhere else later on, you can access that account. We're talking about, traditions, things like that in different countries. If you noticed in India, a lot of women, wear a lot of gold jewelry and things like that. Part of it was a long tradition. It's a way of kind of showing off family wealth, but it's also the way that you're acquiring your wealth in a way that can be liquidated if times get tough or hard. You can always got the gold. You can always, if times get tough, use that. But the problem is, if you're fleeing or whatever, it's something physical that can be taken off of you and stolen. Nobody knows what your Bitcoin account is. Somebody else mentioned it's somewhere farther back in the comments about the electricity use of Bitcoin. Now, that has something to do with the Bitcoin mining. and I got to admit, a lot of it's above me. I can't fully understand it. But the way Bitcoin is generated is that you've got to have computers that are operating and running really long, complex formulas and calculating those. So it uses a whole pile of computing power. And with a bunch of the computing power invested into that, it'll slowly generate a bit of Bitcoin. It'll mine it. Weird. I don't fully understand, but it limits the amount of Bitcoin that gets put out. Nobody can flood it. Nobody can mine a whole whack of it. But if you've got a large operation that's mining a bunch of Bitcoin, the computer power you're dedicating to it will use a lot of power. So that's where some people are saying digital currencies are causing global warming. Of course, everything is, right? But just once it's generated and once it's saved and everything, then it's just a digital footprint. It's not actually causing the problem or increased energy use. I mean, physical mining takes some energy too. Kenzie Kraken, and I saw you on the comment scroll on a podcast I was on yesterday with the Frontier group. What do I think about EB saying yesterday he won't have the Northern Gateway? And that gets back to what I was talking about. We're going to have a showdown going on with this federal government, and we're going to find out if they really mean it or not. As Jen said, the minister was saying that there's going to be a pipeline. It's going to happen, and it's going to be in 2 years, and it's not if, it's when. Great words, but we'll see. So now we've got EB drawing the line in the sand, just as we've seen in Quebec, they're drawing the line in the sand. Is the government going to assert itself in standing up for the Federation and saying this is in the national interest and it's going whether the Premier likes it or not? Or are they going to still continue to say, which is contrary to the Constitution of the Federation, that a province has the ability and right to stop a neighboring province from doing commerce and getting its goods to the coast? This is where the rubber is going to meet the road. So, Carney, are you going to be a leader? Are you going to tell Quebec and are you going to tell EB where it goes? Or are you going to allow the province? Because I tell you what, we got a unity crisis building. And yes, as I said, I've been working the knife in the crack and trying to split it open myself. If you continue to refuse to enforce your own constitution for fear of losing votes in Quebec, some in Lower Mainland BC, then the country's going to be ripped apart. It's just going to be. Because there's no point in being in the Federation. There's no point. A large point of the Federation is the unrestricted movement and trade of goods and people across it. And if you allow players within it to hinder that, then you don't actually have a federation. That was the whole point of the rail line being what built Canada, right? This was the thing that united the country. This was a means of moving people and goods all the way across the country and what held it together. And that's why the Constitution made it clear. The federal government oversteps so many roles, gets so deeply integrated into our life where it shouldn't, with dental plans and child lunch plans and daycare and all these things that really shouldn't have anything to do with the federal government, pharmaceutical plans. Yet at the same time, won't step in on the few things they should. One of the things I talk about often is Switzerland. I love their decentralized government. They're heavily empowered cantons, which are their provincial equivalents in that country, and a small federal government that only deals with larger things. And the federal government's mandate is very limited. It deals with the post, which is a separate issue we got going on in Canada, which is a bigger deal in the past, though. Deals with foreign affairs, of course, and the national currency, and the military, things that a federal government has to. And also it would deal with ensuring that the country still has trade within it. Instead, we've got a government that micromanages and gets into every facet of our lives, yet doesn't have the balls to get in and do the one thing it should be obligated to, though, and that is the enforcement of free trade within the country. They're saying the right words lately, but I'll believe it when I see it. So now we've got people like, as was pointed out, EB saying he's not going to allow it, and Quebec saying they're not going to allow things. If the government isn't going to be the oversight on that, then we are just 10 individual provinces. Let's just bite the bullet and go fully independent, and then we can negotiate as independent powers with each other. Because I know some people are saying we should just block BC stuff and everything. Well, yeah, you see, that's the irony. We wouldn't be allowed to, because if we blocked a railway from delivering BC goods across Alberta under the Federation right now, the federal government say that's not allowed under our Constitution. Well, no, it isn't. But it's also not allowed for you guys to stop a pipeline. So shit or get off the pot. Do we have it or do we not? If we're independent, that gets down to that discussion that happens all the time. You'd be landlocked. Oh, dear. So what? So what? So Alberta would be landlocked. We'd be next to a country or a nation or a province that's still part of Canada, let's say, if Alberta was gone and BC wasn't. Well, BC needs to get all those goods east because that's where their main customers are. And there's a lot of eastern goods have to get to the west coast because that's where that port is. So what are they going to do? Catapult it over province of Alberta? No, we negotiate. We make a deal. We say, if we want to have your containers, trains full of them, and trucks and goods come across our province, you are going to allow us to have that pipeline running across your province. And it's not free. It's not like you force that pipeline through. You'd pay a fee to the province for having that pipeline across it, but you make a deal and you get it done. Right now, it's not getting done. Right now, we're allowing provincial governments to hinder and stop that trade. So yeah, it's quite something seeing EB standing up like that. It's putting this government in a tough position. But good. Hey, you wanted the big boy job, Carney. Well, now you got it. Figured out. And Premier Smith has been certainly standing up, making her demands, pretty clear demands. And we're seeing posturing and we're seeing support for independence going in a way that we'd never seen before. And as those demands, which were pretty clear that Smith made, 8 of them or so, as the federal government refuses to follow through or participate in those demands, we're only going to see support for independence grow more, because it's showing, look, because these demands were not unreasonable, and they're saying, look, we've tried, we've put in decades of this, a lifetime of this. This federal government is not interested in working with the province. It's not interested in helping us along. So what's the point? And more and more people, we're going to have a referendum in Alberta within a year. It's looking pretty clear now. What exactly the question will be, we'll see. What exactly the date will be, we'll see. But my guess is going to be a clear-cut question in probably the spring of 2026, so a little less than a year from now. And if we don't see some heavy movement towards things, and especially if, as I said, Canada's still broken, our economy's still hooped, we're still in trouble. We've had a recent report coming out saying as many as 100,000 jobs are going to be lost, and Canada's on the way to recession because of this bad federal government that will not change things. Well, if people can't pay the mortgage, they're not going to think twice about giving it a crack for independence because they got nothing to lose anymore, do they? Your attachment to the flag reduces when you can't put food on the table. And that's what it's going to start coming to. So no more mealy-mouthed, mushy middle talk out of Carney. He either has to change the course of this country or it's going to shatter. Canada's border problem, Greg Burns saying, talking about, we got a few things going on there with the border. Let's talk about that for a second. Somebody mentioned on a comments scroll the other day, I think my other show on Wednesday too, 1% of containers are checked that come into Canada. That's where a whole pile of goods from China and all around the world come into the Vancouver port, and they come up the St. Lawrence, and 1% of them are checked. I said before, President Trump has been pretty hysteric and says a lot of things that are untrue when he's negotiating and everything. He's exaggerated, I think, the amount of fentanyl that comes from Canada, but then who knows? Because if we aren't even checking the containers that are coming into Canada, how do we know? And what an open gateway to get into the United States then, right? That 99% of your goods are going to get through if you're smuggling stuff. And if you're thinking of something fentanyl, so powerful, so terrible, you only need, 20, 30, 50 kilograms of that stuff. Massive amount that can be spread around and kill a whole bunch of young people all over North America, addict them. In a sea can, find it. Try to find it. So it's coming in. But why among all other things, this is where, again, this government's going to have to find some balls that I don't think they have. Why won't they crack down on the port? Why won't they do more inspections? I'll tell you why. Because the Teamsters and the Longshoremen's Union have a stranglehold on those ports, and they're corrupt to the core. And it's not an exaggeration. They've long been known for being corrupt. Where do you think Jimmy Hoffa came from? The Teamsters have always been corrupt. And they make a heck of a lot of money making sure those ports allow the free flow of illicit goods in and things like stolen vehicles out. And the federal government's scared of unions. They won't crack down and have it out with the union. So they'll just allow that to continue to be a smuggling hub out there. I've had Sam Cooper on the show a number of times. Another thing he talks about too is we are also a hub for money laundering. You see, if you're going to be in large scale foreign crime and bad acting, you also need to launder that money. And Canada is just a soft touch for it all. So Communist Party of China, Mexican cartels, this has been going on even prior to Trudeau, using a lot of Vancouver casinos, just laundering money hand over fist right in front of everybody, and they're afraid to step in and do anything about it. Why? Cowardly government. Insufferable redneck saying Vancouver port is controlled by the Hells Angels. Yeah, that's a part of it. Organized crime in general. And that organized crime is tied into the other big facet of organized crime, which is unions. And organized crime, organized labor, they have a pretty close relationship with each other. So what are they going to do? Let's see some of the areas. It looks like my guest is running a little behind here. We'll hope they make it in. This came out from Blacklocks. These guys are great too. Had 7 staffers work on UFOs. This is one of the things Cabinet spent. Our science advisor, we didn't get the documents for it or how much. The science advisor, you're going to get wondering why the country's going broke, wonder why the civil service is so huge, such a bureaucracy. This science advisor gets a salary of $393,000 a year, plus I'm sure a lot of benefits, pension, and holidays. And they compiled tens of thousands of pages of research and employed 7 people to look into UFOs. Really? Is this a problem? Are they crashing out here? I mean, aside from the odd lunatic saying they've been probed when probably they just passed out in front of the wrong bar, we're going to spend God knows how much on this. You know, I know it sounds relatively small when we talk about the billions and billions of dollars that our government wastes, but you see, when you see how bad our massive, and our bureaucracy is massive, how badly it wastes money, and it's become an industry unto itself. And this is where we're getting back to why Canada is broken. We're actually choking our productive industries. We're choking our resource industries. We're choking our value-added industries. The ones that take products, refine products, sell products, make things that people consume. We're taxing the crap out of them, and we're shutting them down and shutting them in. Meanwhile, we're hiring more and more and more pointy-headed bureaucrats to sit in Ottawa and Quebec to suck in the money on things like this, where you have 7 people making 6 figures each to study UFOs. How many thousands of departments have we got like this? Do you understand? We have a parasite sucking us dry, and that parasite's the civil service, and is disrupting the entire economy. It's making us a bad place to live. It's making our productivity levels. Look at all those things. The beauty of online research. You can see the productivity levels of Canada measured against the rest of the world. Ours stink. When you look at the GDP per capita, the wealth per individual, we're in the toilet. It's not growing. I keep using the analogy because you can find those things. Canada's economy is equivalent to Mississippi now. Mississippi is the poorest state in the entire United States. But as I also point out, at least in Mississippi, you can buy a house for $50,000 or $100,000. Here, we got the income of somebody from Mississippi, but a house costs you anywhere from at the lowest $300,000 up into the over $1 million if you're in BC or Toronto or one of the major cities. Calgary, I think it's around 600 and some thousand. Yeah, we're in a lot of trouble, and it's integrated, and it's sick to the core. Somebody was talking about, here's one of the challenges too with inspecting the sea cans and the containers coming in. We can't hit every one of them. We can't get them all. That's another problem that hits with efficiency, right? When trade will get hindered. You can't hold them all up or we become even more inefficient. But we got to do more than 1%. There's definitely can do a lot better than that. You got to search, it's just like any border. When you're driving across the border, they don't search every car unless there's something specific going on. But as long as they're searching enough of them, a lot of people just won't smuggle things across, or at least they're going to find a better way to do it. This number came out. 51% of Canadians, are struggling with their mortgage. So over half, just barely, 50% plus 1 more percent, speaking of referendums and things. But when we get half of our country is having trouble, it says they're using their credit cards and other borrowing tools to meet their their bills and their mortgage. We're going to see people losing houses soon if this economic situation in Canada does not dramatically change. But no, it's not going to. We're still broken. We got a government that's, again, talk. It doesn't do a damn thing. Carney? Yeah, somebody was saying, oh, you're whining, you just got in. So what? He made big promises and we're broke right friggin' now. Enough kicking the can down the road. Enough pretending, oh, he's new. He's leading the same assholes who have been in power for 10 years. No, you don't have an excuse for a long wait like others. It's not like a brand new government just got in. It's just you assholes with a new head. So do something. I'm doing something. I'm hitting these meetings, I'm hitting these rallies, and I'm seeing a growing amount of people throwing their hands up and saying, I'm out, I'm done, I'm finished, I got nothing to lose. Independence sounds bloody good to me. And it's growing. And those outside who don't understand why it's growing, fine. But, the attitude from the federalists, from the anti-independence people out there that are constantly basically saying, you can't do it, you're not allowed to do it. They don't understand. We're not asking your permission. We don't need your permission. You should be asking why a growing number of people are moving towards independence. If you really want to stop it, look to the root causes as to why they're deciding to go that way. Because when you tell us we can't, it doesn't stop us. In fact, it emboldens us. It strengthens the movement. You guys are taking the wrong approach on how to do this. But I mean, speaking of unions, speaking of stupid, and I know the two words coming together into sentences quite often. Let's look at that Canada Post. Looks like the union backed down a little bit. They were supposed to go on strike today. They didn't. But they're talking now, we're not going to take any overtime. Oh, big deal. Look, go to in Calgary. You can go to the large postal depots. And you see these guys coming in. And outside of the depot, you'll see it. I put a picture of that up on X. There'll be like 100 taxis there. Yeah, these postal workers show up at the depot. They get a taxi ride to their walk. They go to the box. They walk around. They deliver mail all day. And they take a taxi back. They're usually done an 8-hour shift in 5 hours, but they get paid for 8 and quite well for being a monkey. And here we go. Gaming with the bone. Yeah, they work 5 hours and get paid 8 for it. A commenter pointing it out. And so what if they're not going to work overtime? None of them do. Though I wouldn't be surprised if maybe some of them are clocking it somehow. Maybe they're having a few coffees before they come back. I've had it with them. And they had the excuse before, and we had those debates when they went on strike last year saying, hey, it's a crown corporation, they're self-funding, it'll get sorted out. No, it won't. They took over $1 billion in a bailout, and they're still losing billions over the last few years. It's got to stop. It's a dinosaur. It's got to be cut down to the core. It's got to. Does the federal government have the balls to do that, though? I doubt it. Patty Hajdu is the labor minister. Is she going to step in and do something about this? Probably not. Or maybe they'll just bail it out again. They're too afraid of labor strife. We got to get with the modern world, guys. How many more billions do we want to put into this? This is, again, showing how inefficient Canada is. But these unions, they don't get it. I mean, if they'd have just been reasonable with what they're asking for, they might have still managed to hang on to this, but they're killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. But welcome to parasites. Does a wood tick think twice that it might be killing its host? Tapeworm? I'm serious. That's what a lot of these particularly public service union people are. They're parasites. They're sucking off of the productive. And eventually you'll either kill the host or the host is going to pluck you off and flick you like a booger. And I've had it with the posties. They're among the worst of them. You guys had a good gig. You blew it. You wanted too much. You got too greedy. I'm not going to feel bad for you when you get laid off, and you're going to. Speaking of other parasites, how about the CBC? Speaking of, another dinosaur, another obsolete institution that's costing taxpayers billions that very few Canadians are actually using. They just acknowledged a string of errors under the guise of fact-checking. Yeah, they admitted the CBC producer got her facts wrong in purporting to correct others' comments in the election results in Carleton. So the person paid by the CBC through your tax dollars to correct the lies in the news was actually lying. Good use of your dollars, isn't it? Speaking of self-declared fact checkers, for those not familiar with her, and I don't blame you if you aren't, but I'm going to bring her up anyways. Rachel Gilmore, known twit, runs a little site called Bubble Pop. But she is prolific online. She's gotten herself in the soup, of course, basically celebrating the killing of Jews and saying that it's unfair that people have been speaking nicely about that young couple who were engaged to be married, who went to look at a museum and got gunned down in Washington. She's saying, why are we talking so nice about them and not talking about the plight of the Gazans? Listen, bubble pop twit. They were murdered young people who weren't harming a single person out there. But Rachel was fired from Global. She was fired from CTV as a fact checker. She bounces around, but unfortunately, due to basically social media and revealing outfits, she still maintains a small amount of an audience out there. I don't think she has much influence on it. Not too many people take her very seriously anymore, but she's still there and still needs to be countered. It comes social media in general, fact checking. There's a lot of, I say it often, we're exposed to more information than we've ever seen in our whole lives. We're also exposed to more BS than we've ever had in our whole lives too. But we can't rely on these fact checkers, as I see the others laughing about that. Yeah, with Rachel Gilmore calling herself such, and as with the CBC calling itself fact checkers when it turns out they do anything but. You got to make yourself the fact checker. You've got to look through. You got to look for second sources on things. You got to check it up. That's just the way it goes. It's personal responsibility. I mean, try to find outlets that lie to you less than others. I like to think that ours doesn't, at all. It doesn't lie less. I'm saying it doesn't lie. But as a viewer, as a listener, as a reader, it's up to us. Personal responsibility. Don't wait for some government institution. I mean, there's some of the fear too. We got Stephen Guilbeault, the crazed extremist. He's in charge now of Heritage, and he's talking about imposing the streaming act and things like that, where they're going to control what you get to see and hear. And they're going to claim it's, for the sake of getting facts to us. Scary times. VPNs, I think that's what they're called. Maybe that's what you got to go to find your ways to get information without the government finding out about it. Crazy times. Like I said, it all keeps coming down to the same thing I started the show off with and pointing out that Canada is still broken. It was broken before. It's broken today. We can save the West. Either way, thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm going to be back on Wednesday. There's going to be other productions and shows coming out throughout. Keep your eye on all those Western Standard channels. Share them, subscribe to them, like them, all that good stuff. And be sure to take out a subscription with the Standard so we can afford to keep doing these things for you. Thank you all for tuning in. Good to see you. And I will see you on the next one.